Yeah. All right, so we're going to continue. I'm just gonna pick up where I left off. We're working on terrains. Expect you to know basic Unity interface from the tutorials that Justin showed everyone. Holding Control and Shift snaps an object to the terrain, which is really useful. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna work on the shore area, which should be interesting. Um, so first thing we're going to do is click on the terrain. You'll see all these terrain options up here. Um, there's quite a few of them, so we're just going to focus in on the important ones. The little gear is going to show all your options. So this is really what is, most important, because if you mess with these options, then you might actually end up really screwed later on. So you can see we already have our options all set. Most importantly is stuff like the control texture resolution, as well as, let's see, control texture resolution is really important because that's going to determine the size that your brush can actually get down to, because it's essentially determining the resolution of your painting surface. It's really pretty hard to actually bump any of this up to higher than 1024. So, 2049 is what we have set for the actual resolution of the height map, which is the actual resolutions of the texture, I believe. Wish they had hoverovers. But yeah, you can also read about those. These are the settings that we chose to use. I chose to use on this map, and they can definitely be changed too. I think on some later maps we made them a bit more efficient than this actually. Alright, so that's this. All this other crap in here is useful, but not really that important. We're not really using Unity trees or Unity wind or the base terrain. Oh, that's worth going over for a little bit. God, it's so laggy. I don't understand why. Um, yeah, so let's go over this base terrain. This is just why we actually use Unity terrains right here. I don't know how well you can see this sort of, this wireframe view, but right now the pixel error is set to 12 on this terrain. Now you'll see when I increase it, the wireframe is actually decimating down on the terrain versus decreasing it. And you can see how it's actually popping in square chunks. So this is what is actually happening under the surface when a player is walking around. There are these square chunks of the terrain that are loaded in based on the distance that you set for the base map distance. So this is the reason why we use terrains. Otherwise, we would just import in our own custom meshes. But because of this automatic reduction technique, we can make terrains that have a really high detail only where we need them, which is close to the player. So we're just going to set that back to 12. Yeah. So that's pretty good. Eventually you have to worry about the base terrain pixel error, but you don't usually have to worry about that till the end. But actually, now that I think about it, it's actually really important to consider along the way, because for things like really far off mountains, you may be able to see how this mountain is starting to kind of you can start to see the hard like polygon edges. You know, it starts to decimate to the point where things just become really jagged and pointy. So, you know, as we move the pixel error, you can see those mountains in the background changing. So it actually is really important to consider how this pixel error is going to affect your far distance objects, especially objects that have a really strong silhouette. So, you know, we can toggle it on with the fog layer and see that this mountain, because it's close enough, the fog isn't obscuring it. So we have to really worry about how detailed we paint it in consideration with this pixel error. So that's actually something really important to consider. All right, and I just wish I knew why it was so laggy. Usually it's not laggy. I feel like, you know, it's just gonna jump around a lot. All right, so that's pretty much everything I want to cover in this tab. It's all really important stuff, and for now you can really just use like these settings or play around with them and see how that works. Now we're just going to move right to left. This tab has different brushes. To be quite honest, I usually don't use these very often. You may try out some of these like kind of scratchier, you know, camel hair sort of brushes. But I don't really use them very often. I generally just stay with the default um, highly feathered brush, and that works pretty well. You know, like all these other brushes I've never found a use for, like these weird gradient brushes and stuff. So we're not going to worry really much at all about this tab. If you can, you know, make your own brushes or take advantage of these, I'd definitely say go for it. All right, what is this? This is the trees tab. Again, we don't use trees. There are other ways you can use this, such as painting grass. You know, and pretty much what this tab does is it lets you paint an object over a variable height terrain. So if I just want randomized grass to be all over this terrain, it lets me paint it on a huge brush size so I don't have to waste time placing every single little grass piece. Again, we're not going to worry about that right now. So now we're going to get into the important buttons. This one is brushes, paint texture. Yeah, so again, you have your brush options. This is where your textures are going to be loaded in. You can see that this map already has quite a few textures loaded in here. So now, this is another really important concept to go over, and that is how textures are going to affect your the optimization of your mesh. Now, how it works is in order to paint things over your mesh, you have a mask which uses RGBA, red, green, blue, alpha. Each one of those channels in that control texture, which if you remember up here, we defined the control texture resolution right here. Each one of those channels, RGBA channels, is used as a mask for one texture. So what that means is that every 4 textures you use, we have to generate a new control texture mask, which basically what Unity does is it generates a whole new material, or maybe a new shader. I'm not sure if I'm wording it correctly, but it generates a whole new material, we'll say, and it just puts it over top of the other one. So for this one, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 12, 15 textures, we actually need to use 4 different materials, which are which each have their own RGBA mask. So the only thing that you really need to take out of this is you want to work in chunks of 4. So if you can limit it to only 4 textures, that's great. If you can't, then, you pretty much might as well just use another 4 because you're going to be calling that extra draw call anyway. So, working in groupings of 4 is a pretty good way to go about using textures. Obviously, the more textures you use, the more inefficient your terrain's going to get. All right, so we have that. Settings. It's pretty basic. I'm not going to go over this. Brush size obviously is, let's see. This is also going to be controlled by your control texture resolution. So, what you really want to do when you're starting any terrain, I'd highly recommend this, is you need to determine what your smallest unit of scale is, and then see if the terrain is workable at that size. So right now you can see that like my smallest probably paintable area, which is like I'm literally almost painting, I'm painting the pixels. You can see the jaggedness. We're doing a very aggressive size here because, for a path for the pony to walk on, we can already almost start to see the edges of the path breaking apart because the pixels are so, or the control texture resolution is so low compared to the scale of the terrain. So this is a really good way to determine if your control texture resolution is of an appropriate size. This is a little bit, this is like just within the comfort realm, I would say. Because, while that does look a little pixelated, if I use a bit softer brush that kind of, goes a little bit farther in the bounds, you can see I can still kind of get a pretty decent path shape. And then what we can do is we can go in with, say another brush here, and we're gonna bump up the opacity a lot, like 100 or something. Whoops. And we can you can kind of smooth out the edge of the path like that. And you can see that, I can get pretty tight paths in by using this technique that don't look that bad. Now, we're an MMO, we're going for efficiency, especially on a huge map like this. So sometimes we do have to make, sacrifices for that. So you can see I'm able to paint a pretty decent path here of a pony scale with this base control texture resolution of 1024. So this is working. That's a good way to kind of verify that your resolution is set up all right before you get started, because these options, many of them are destructive. You can't just paint half the texture and then decide you want to change things. There's no real easy way to do that. So you got to be careful about that. All right, so we have that. I didn't go over brush size and opacity, but they're pretty common sense. Brush size obviously is going to determine your brush size, and opacity determines how transparent the texture is. Target strength, I don't really use. It's like kind of repetitive. It's like opacity, but I don't know. Maybe you could find a better use for it than me. All right, so that's this whole tab. Great. You add a texture by hitting Edit Texture, Add Texture, and Unity is a bit silly. They don't label the names of the textures in the window, which is it's just kind of dumb. I don't, you know, I want to know what these textures are called. There's all these different grass, but whatever, we're not going to harp on that. So anyway, you add textures by clicking that button. It gives you the option to add textures. More importantly, what you're going to be using is edit texture. So, you know, I want to click on this grass here and I want to edit it. You'll see that, you know, for example, this texture has an X and a Y size of 50 by 50. That means that I'm telling this texture to tile 50 by 50 times, which is going to make it smaller, I believe. So now if I look at the same exact grass next to it, I bet it's going to have, yeah, exactly. That's a good technique that I'll cover in a little bit. But first we're going to go over the buttons. All right, keeping on going down the line, smooth height. Let's see. Just have to paint something to go over this. And then I'm also going to flip something real quick here. Let's do this. All right, I just flipped it away from our shader to a more default shader. If you ever work in LOE, this is something you're going to want to do because our shader is toony and it flattens out the world, making it harder to understand depth. So I like to work with no shader applied, so I get Unity default lights that really give me a strong sense of depth. All right, so anyway, we were in this tab, which is smoothing stuff out. Now, let's go ahead and increase the size. And again, this is really just smoothing. It's really self-explanatory. You might not be able to see that, but as I increase the opacity, it increases the strength in which I smooth things out. So you can see I'm smoothing this kind of pointy lump down to a lumpy hill. Now, something really important to note is that Unity's smoothing does have limitations. If you create a really bumpy surface, usually it's impossible to smooth back down to a perfectly flat plane. So you can't rely on smooth to undo like a lot of work. It has limitations to what it can smooth. But that's really trial and error, and you'll learn that. All right, paint heights. This tool is very useful because what it's going to do is let me paint to a target height. Now normally this is really annoying because you would have to manually set the height and that's really frustrating to do. Now this hold shift to sample target height is the key hotkey here because what it lets me do is say, all right, I kind of like the height of, whoops, man, that's bad. So I kind of like the height of this, you know, this second lump here. If I hold shift, I actually sampled the target of the lump, which is the top, and then I paint and it automatically snapped to that height. This is really useful if you want to start getting a kind of a stepped shape down. So what I really wanted to cover here is how I use this tool and how I think it works really well to be used. So, for example, we want to have a nice beach that comes down on here, but then on the side there's going to be steeper mountains, like steeper sort of cliffs here. So let's say I want to, you know, I want to start giving it a little bit more definition. One thing that you can do, let's see, we move the opacity down a little bit, is I can just start sampling randomized, it's pretty much just randomized points on this cliff. Like, you know, I don't really have any method to it, but it's a real easy way to get a sort of stepped cliff style. Man. Is the video like kind of really choppy for you?
No, that's okay.
All right. So this is a really key method that I have found to help me in Unity create things. God, I just don't. Sorry, I'm just gonna check something real quick. All right, I am kind of running out of memory a little bit. I don't know. There's not much I can do about it. Okay. I'm sorry, it's just really hard to work in. I should probably work in a smaller scene or something. Or maybe, you know what? What if I turn these off? Does that help? Sorry. Let's turn this off. And let's turn the trees off too. Yeah, this is a pretty big scene, so... Oh, much better. There we go. Yeah, so I was the one who's lagging. This is so much better. All right, great. Now, anyway, as I was saying, um, using the paint heights, interesting. Using the paint heights tool in that way is a really good way to start a sort of begin blocking out heights. So, for example, when I was when I was saying this beach initially, I was like, you know what, it's too steep. I don't want this beach to be that steep. I want it to be very, nice and gradual as much as I can in the beginning, and then later on, or on the sides is where I want it to be steep with these big mountains. So just by using the paint heights tool, what I can do is I can start to rough out uh, how I want the elevation to change in this kind of chunking fashion. And what I'm doing is I'm just sampling slightly higher heights as I go up. Oops. So let's change the brush. Still a little big. That's a little small. Unfortunately, there's no way to manually change the brush with hotkeys. That would be an incredible tool that Unity should have. um, but yeah, so if I want to make this generally a more gentler rise, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to just start, really digging out up here, because that's the only way that we're going to really get our more gentle, sort of slowly rising terrain area. All right, and you can see just by... I swear it's not always this bad. All right, and you can see just by doing that, we actually already have made it a lot more gradual. There's still these kind of lips, and my strategy for cleaning those up is to, first of all, try to make it as smooth as possible with the paint terrain heights. So wherever there's like a really steep lip, I just sample the halfway point between the top and the bottom of it. So that's how I kind of get this. And then all I have to do is go into smooth terrains, smooth height, increase the opacity. Maybe we'll increase the brush size a little bit. And then I can just smooth it all out. Maybe we'll even go a bit higher opacity. So by doing that, we were able to get a much broader sort of or a much more gentle shoreline. Although I still don't think it's quite gentle enough. This is a lot better than where we started. You know, walking down this as a character or a pony, it would seem and feel a lot more like you're rolling towards this low end of the shoreline, and you know, then there'd be these really nice big cliff features on both sides. So, all right, that was the terrain heights tool, which is very useful. And great. The only other tool is the raise lower terrains. And this tool does exactly really what you'd imagine. You just change the height and the opacity, and it changes the strength at which you raise and lower a part of the terrain. So, you know, however you want to do it. So, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. All right, so we've now gone over every option within the terrain, the base terrain features. Now Unity's, it's pretty simple, to be honest. There's a little bit of you know, it's sometimes a little too simple, I think, but it really does work for getting a lot of ground down quickly. All right, so now that we are done with that, let's go into some more advanced techniques. Let's see. We already talked about the using the smooth heights to kind of get that stepped look, which is really one thing that I use very often. I think another good thing to go over was going to be the thing that I touched upon earlier, which is which was how to use textures to not tile as obviously. So this is going to be like one of your chief sort of constant struggles, is how do you paint the ground so that it looks nice and isn't going to be obvious to the player that it's tiling, but you're remaining very efficient with your texture usage, which, you know, we probably aren't so much here, but you know, you want to minimize the number of textures you use, and you also want to minimize work because you don't want to you know, you don't want to keep asking art or 2D or yourself to make a ton of little textures that are only changing a bit. So Unity does offer us one way to do that, which is to, as I said earlier, increase the tiling. 3D modelers may be aware of this technique, texture artists as well, but essentially what you can see is for textures that are really well used, oftentimes what I like to do to get more, I guess, bang for your buck is to have one texture that is, you know, say grass 1, that has a certain level of tiling that I think is good for pony scale, so micro scale, you know, what the player actually sees. Then I like to have the exact same texture, but double the scale. So the idea is, let's go ahead and try it out. Let's see if my previously made technique works here. Let's increase the brush size a bit. All right, so if I just start painting this, you can see that it already looks pretty good right now. You know, Vector is the one who made these textures. He did a really good job of making it so that it's less obvious that it even tiles. So, you know, he has some detail in there that, you know, makes it so that, you know, the ground sort of has some really subtle richening detail, But if you look at it from our pony's perspective, I just clicked Shift and Spacebar at the same time to toggle full screen. If you look around, it doesn't look that bad. Now, there's not much detail. We can start to see sort of the resolution breakdown in these swirls, but all in all, it's not too bad. All right, so that was our texture only with the, let's see, the 50 by 50 scale. So now let's go over and paint on top of the 50 by 50 scale with the 100 by 100, and we can see what happens. So I'm going to decrease the brush size a bit, and maybe even a little bit more to like 14. All right, and then the opacity, maybe I'll do like 50 or so. So we can just see the difference here. Oh, it's tough to see the difference.
Yeah, your opacity is
Oh, you're right.
goes down to 11.
All right, I need to see myself what the difference is, because I always forget if larger scale is it's actually tricky. Let's see, how can we better determine this? All right, let's do it this way. All right. Sorry, first I just forget my original settings. So first we're gonna do it this way. This one is the bigger, or the smaller, and this one's the bigger. All right, so just by painting them, we can see that this one, which was the 100 by 100, is in fact bigger. So so the 50 by 50 is more detail. So what that means is that we want to take the bigger one as our base. So this is the one we're just going to increase. Oh, a little big there. We're going to make the bigger one our base, and then we take the smaller one, decrease the brush size a bit, decrease the opacity a bit, and then what we do is we just start randomly painting portions. Maybe the opacity is still a bit high. It's hard to really tell exactly what I'm doing here. If we actually looked at the texture mask, it would become more apparent, but it's kind of a pain to open that up. The idea, however, is that we're using the same texture, and we're overlaying it onto itself at a different scale. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to prevent tiling, or it's going to prevent obvious tiling that the player can see. Now, I think this will actually be better illustrated. Yeah, whenever it freezes up like that, it's because it's auto-saving. Alright, I think this will actually be best illustrated at a larger scale. So, oh, was this the base one? This was the base one. Yeah, so at a larger scale, we can see how this tiles. Now, let's add in the smaller scale one over top of it we'll just start with a really low opacity. Now, I think, does this illustrate the point pretty well, like how this is working? So you can see where I'm painting, because of the smaller scale, it's really increasing the variety in our texture. You can see kind of these sort of strokes that I went over, and it almost looks, because we have a very low opacity, as if the grass is sort of fading in and out of, like, sort of big chunkings of grass here versus, it goes down into smaller chunkings here. it's a really good technique to sort of prevent tiling. That is a really critical thing to learn. It really helps you a lot, and it's going to make your job as the terrain painter a lot easier because it gives you some power over the texture. You know, you don't have to just ask 2D to, all right, make a texture that's, 3 times the scale or whatever. So, all right, that is going to work great. Um, let's see. Now, I'm not gonna do this, but I'm as just like a recommendation. If you're gonna be working in Unity, or pretty much if you're gonna be doing anything that has to do with digital stuff, you gotta pick up Photoshop. It's just a fact of life. I mean, or a comparable program. If you're into like GIMP or something, you can pretty much do similar things. But the reason I say this for this specific situation is you can see over in my texture windows, these 3 textures right here are all the same. This one was our, let's see, our 100 by 100. So this was our, I always get them mixed up. Our large one. I don't know why I have so much trouble with that. Yeah, this one was our large one. The 50 by 50 was our small one. And then let's see what this one is. All right, so this is also 100 by 100, so it's going to be larger, but it's a slightly different shade of green. Now, this is something that you can do really easily in Photoshop. You just go into Photoshop and you play around with all the different level adjustments. Hue, saturation, curves editor, pretty much all the different adjustment layers. So what I can do is really easily go into Photoshop, boost the yellow levels, and bring it back in, and all of a sudden I now have yet another texture all based on the same one, so I don't even have to do my own original art. You know what I mean? All I'm doing is doing a hue saturation shift. And then if you see, with one texture, we're already creating a very, pretty varied, I would say, terrain. It doesn't look like one texture. It really looks like there's going to be, different types of grasses that you're running through. And that's really the key to saving a lot of time when you do textures, because you don't want to have to redraw a whole new grass texture if you can just make slight tweaks to it like this and still get a nice, varied, non-obviously tiled result. All right, great. So that is another very, very, very useful technique. All right. What else do we want to go over? This is great. We're going to get over this terrain stuff in no time. Let's see. All right, let's continue on with like an actual project. Let's really actually do this beach. So now that I feel like we have a comfortable amount of the technical aspect of things, what these buttons do, and how to use them to your advantage, how to blend textures together, how to affect the texture's scaling, how to optimize textures based on only having, groupings of 4. I think we're going to move into just like some more general design sensibility now, because that's half the battle. Learning the technical skills is great, but you need to actually consider how terrains work. So, alright, when you're making a terrain, it's really good to always consider what I like to think of as like the erosion factor. You know, it's not that this terrain exists in this moment in time when I was creating it for the players. It's this terrain has existed since the beginning of time on this imaginary planet. These rivers used to be streams and they were carved out of the earth. So, it may seem like kind of an abstract sort of topic to touch upon, but what I'm trying to get at is, you have to consider always how water moves through a space, which is going to help you with how to consider erosion, which is sort of the primary driving factor of how terrain looks the way it does. Um, you know, Not including sort of, human made, pony made, whatever, alterations to the terrain. If we're just looking at it in its natural state, erosion is a key element to that. Eventually we can get into how, like, say different types of rocks could affect erosion. If I put a really gray, solid looking rock somewhere, you could imagine that that rock was dropped off by a glacier, or maybe it was just a part of the Earth's crust, and as time wore by, all of the softer, sedimentary or dirt around it sort of eroded and washed out, but this giant solid rock stayed here. So it would almost create kind of an island where erosion could not take place because of, how solid this rock is. So that's kind of what we're going to consider when we think about these two side rocks, because how could these giant side rocks stay so so cliffy while this center part is so eroded and smoothed down to a beach? So that's how we're going to take that. All right, great. I think that might have been a bit too vague, but all right. So let's also consider the pieces that we're going to work with. Whoops. Now, as with all projects, you're going to have assets that you have at your disposal, which are, going to be really useful to helping you out. Now, I'm not going to have time to go over everything that we have for Unity, for LOE. But what we do have are essentially 4 terrain pieces. I wish we had more, but we have 4. And what we found is that these 4 pieces generally are, just enough at our disposal. Although now that I think about it, this whole shore area is supposed to use another asset that I didn't really work on. I was supposed to do another asset. We were going to have these interesting rock formations here. So maybe it'd be easier to do a different shore area. Sorry, I'm just gonna think about this for a second, because it might be easier. You know what? I'm just gonna do this one. It'll be more fun. I've already thought about it a bit. Alright. Let me rehide these. Alright, great. So, we've thought about erosion a little bit. we know we want to have, you know, these 2 high points and then sort of a beachy area. So how are we going to do this? Now, if we have these high points, I'm thinking that we're going to, I am kind of feeling bad though, because we get to use these assets. And we're not going to get to use these assets later on. You know what? I think we're going to work over here instead. I'm sorry. Because that beach part is actually going to be using these sort of really jagged rock outcroppings, which are still yet to be created. So I don't want to kind of double over work. But it's cool because we have just as equally fun places to work. And one of those, I think, which is going to be great, is this whole stream connection over here. Because what's going to happen here is there is basically a dormant volcano here that is going to have a waterfall which pours out here. There's going to be a bridge which crosses over right here like this. It's probably gonna, you know, look a little nicer than that. And then we have sort of this this larger mountain here, and you know, there's a lot of different things we can do here. So we're gonna work with this zone instead. Let's see. So let me see if I can find the other bridge. I think there's a copy of it. Yeah. I think this bridge is gonna work better. Oh yes, but it wasn't laid out yet. Alright, well, I'm probably going to take this bridge. Let's bring it over here. Right now, this bridge is more set up as an aqueduct, but this is more of how I imagine it's gonna look. So, oh, that's interesting. Did I? That's a very interesting way to do it. Alright. For now, it doesn't really matter what the bridge looks like. We just want to get an idea of the scaling of this area, because we're going to have a bridge here. We know that for sure. Uh-huh. Oh, I'm surprised those rotated together. Great. So I'm going to move the let's see, I'm gonna move the spawn point because where is it now? Midway Village. Just gotta remember to put this back. But for now, I'm gonna move it over to where we're working so that when I press play mode, it works. Specifically for our Unity project, because it is feature rich, I'd like to say, Justin has a play mode which overrides the whole login process and scene process and everything, and just puts you right in the game. It's crucial for testing. Any game you work on, this isn't just ours, there should be some sort of method of doing this same exact thing, allowing you to jump in and really actually play as the player. Because there we go. Because, well, if you can't see what the player sees, then, you know, it's really silly. It's really silly because you're going to be designing sort of in a bubble of looking at the world from, like, you know, 1,000 feet overhead from your magic floating camera. And then when you finally get into play, you're going to be like, oh, wow, this scale is so off. Everything is so huge. All right, great. So, you know, this bridge is not too bad. The height of this river, I'm pretty happy with it. You know, I want to imagine that it's a pretty steep canyon river. So, you know, I'm pretty generally happy with how this rough work has already been laid out. So, I might increase it a little bit to sort of make the grandeur of the bridge, you know, a bit bigger, or I suppose a bit nicer. So, but we know we're on the right track as far as scale goes. This dormant sort of... All right, let's go back and start doing some terrain work. Oh, you know what? There's another very useful tip that I want to touch upon. This is actually very interesting. So, I'm going to try to make sure that the point holds firm right now, because I just forgot about it till now, but it's a really cool little hidden secret technique. Now, normally in Unity when you go into play mode, you cannot change any options. None of your changes, or I should say your changes do not apply. They will just happen, you know, they'll happen, but once you exit play mode, any changes you made get reverted back. This is useful if you want to test like lights, like in play mode I want to increase the light intensity by 50% to see how it looks, but then when I exit I don't want to undo my original, you know, lights. So anyway, this works. However, because we're using terrains, what we're doing is we're painting to that control texture, and that happens in real time. So essentially what it means is that our painting on that control texture to define the texture, we can do that live while we're playing the game, because there's two drivers of how this terrain works. There's the control texture, which defines which textures appear and how the textures fade and overlap and overlay each other. And there's the height map texture, which is a grayscale texture where I believe white determines the highest places and black determines the lowest places. Because both of these changes are just done to these root textures. Now let me, I better not hype up this thing and it doesn't work, so let me make sure it works first. So we're in play mode right now, and I'm going to go ahead and just make two changes. One to the control texture, because we painted something, and one to the height map texture. I don't want to make it that big though. One to the height map texture. Alright, so we did both of these changes in play mode. Let's see if they save when I exit play mode. Now, hopefully they will. Or else I'll be a big liar. And they did. Alright, excellent. Now, this is something really cool because, well, it's a double-edged sword. You have to realize that your changes to essentially anything in the terrain is destructive. It's going to happen independently of you saving, you know, like saving scene, saving project, doesn't matter. Your textures and your control texture changes are going to happen instantly the moment you paint it. So the only way you can undo is by literally pressing Control Z, and let's say you get like 10 or 20 undo levels. So it's destructive in a sense, but because it applies the changes immediately, what it means is that we can actually go into play mode and we can do all of our terrain work live. So testing out our textures is as easy as just flipping these tabs between scene mode and game mode, instead of me having to constantly wait for game mode to load up, which is what I'm waiting for right now. So that is something that should hold true for any project, not just ours. Whoops. Just based on how Unity does textures. So yeah, it looks like I'm getting a bit more lag, which tends to happen when I'm streaming. So I may not actually take advantage of this technique right now, but if your computer can handle it, I'd recommend doing it because, I can literally just paint something, whatever, and then go over to my game tab and oh, there's the changes right there. So that's really useful too to know. All right, but yeah, I don't think I can do this because I just undid my change and in real time my pony fell off. Yeah. So yeah, that's a really cool thing you can do. I'm not going to do it because it appears to be lagging at my computer to be in play mode and stream at the same time. All right, great. So let's actually get to doing something. All right. Let's see. So we know we want this bridge here, and we know about all of the elements around it. Man, it's so laggy. It's really hard to work in like this. All right. So let's start thinking of a general idea here. I'm looking at it from a very broad view, and we want this volcano here. And if we zoom out even farther, we can see this sort of larger changes. So there's a mountain range in the background. And it kind of starts to protrude out a bit here with this sort of dormant volcano, which it could be a dead volcano too. Anyway, the top of the volcano is water now. So, let's see, there's going to be that there. We're going to have the bridge here and the cliff and this little piece here. So, let's start doing stuff. Alright, I'm going to use the technique that I had started earlier with the paint height tool, because to be quite honest, that's one of my favorite techniques to getting things to be, more interesting. Maybe brush size a bit bigger. So we have this volcano here. It's actually pretty too high in opacity. That's better. So why don't we volcano? we're gonna try and make something that looks like a volcano, we might as well check out what a volcano looks like, right? Like, look at this one. So, generally there are these sort of, at least, my sense is that a volcano has lava flows, or had lava flows, which means there has to be these kind of carved out sort of streams that, were once used, or, once had lava flowing through them. That seems to be a pretty common sort of theme among all of these pictures. So we already have one terrain element we can add to make this sort of look more realistic. All these volcanoes have that common feature. There's another one actually with a lake in it, which is what we're going for. So, this is really important to do, is just to take a quick brief look. Like this is great. I think I'm gonna base it off of something like this. I think this is nice. There's a very steep lip, a lake in the middle, and then there are these kind of flowing streams where you'd imagine at one point lava had come out. So let's just go off of this picture. I think that's a good one. Um, Ugh. Autosave is brutal sometimes with a big scene like this, because I have the autosave limit up to be really high. Let's change it to like 10 minutes. Alright. Now, one thing that I'm immediately seeing is the way that this volcano is going to look, unfortunately, makes it so that our paint height technique is not going to work very well, because paint heights sort of gives us, that stepped look, but all of those volcanoes had a, I guess like the way that the lava streams worked, it was more of like a, sort of a stream. I'm not being very descriptive. It was more of like valleys and crevasses and mountains linearly coming off of the center of the volcano. And the step, I don't know, I'm not being very descriptive, but doing it like using that one technique I showed earlier, I don't think is going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go with a regular, just, what we're at, 16 and 20. Just smooth out some of these changes I made earlier. Great. 16, 20. So how I think I'm going to do this is I'm going to use a very low opacity, low strength brush, and I'm going to start to just define these sort of these sort of mountain ranges. They're not really mountain ranges. They're more just like ranges that come off of the volcano, because by defining the high point, we're also defining the low points, which is exactly what we want for this volcano to look like. Maybe at one point, lava, or maybe the volcano's been dead for, hundreds of thousands of years, and all of this sort of erosion was just caused from like a natural spring that bubbled out. So I'm just gonna go through, and maybe that was a little bit too high. Just start to get some general shape. If you don't know where to start, sometimes it's really hard. You know, we're using a reference of this kind of volcano, so we had a pretty cool place to start. But sometimes if you don't know where to start, it's good to just try to take a smaller brush and just start painting, like, you know, hills and valleys. Even if you're just doing it indiscriminately, sometimes that'll start to just get you in the mood to like start creating gestures, even if you don't really know the direction in which those gestures are going. And you'll start to see just shapes form that, you know, look, how do I put this? That generally look pleasing to the eye. Um, you know, this is getting to be more vague, but one, you know, global factor that is good to consider when you do that is something like balanced asymmetry. It's, you know, straightforward enough, but it's one of the most, you know, universally I guess important considerations when it comes to terrain work that there is, because, you know, you have to keep it asymmetrical so that people realistically believe that this could be something that was organically formed and not pony made or human made. But you still want to make it sort of better than real life. So what you can do is start to create like these framed views where, you know, it's believable that this is just a mountain range that formed, but you're cheating the system because it's, you know, because we're making it all in a 3D program, and you're essentially cherry picking like the most beautiful views the most amount of the time. So, you know, that's a really good crossover between, you know, something that is true to realism versus, you know, true to games. Uh, we want the player to, you know, walk along and just be, you know, mystified and really, you know, have an exciting time. We don't want them to just be walking around some random mountain range. We want them to be walking around the most beautiful part of the Grand Canyon. All right. Sorry, I'm kind of fighting with this lag here. It's making it a bit tough for me. So the only thing I'm doing right now is I noticed that the the volcano sort of I'm splitting it up from the rest of the mountains a bit more because it seemed like it was too sort of connected and at the same height up here, which all those images of volcanoes, they pretty much all seem to be like separate freestanding mountains. I didn't really see any volcanoes that were like a part of a larger mountain range, and I'm sure that exists, but you know, we have to consider what people's public impression of a volcano is, maybe a little bit more so than the scientific accuracy of, you know, how a volcano can look in every situation. All right. God, this lag is just making it so hard. All right, cool. So, yeah, this is pretty fine. I'm gonna smooth it out because I kind of got really lumpy. It kind of got really lumpy, so. Now, you know, here's a good example of what I was mentioning earlier on the limitations of the smooth brush, which is something I really don't like about Unity, but I learned to live with it. Is the smooth brush 100% smooth doesn't mean decimate your model or your mesh down to a flat surface, which is what it means in a lot of other programs. It just means we're going to smooth it a little bit more. And it's hard to describe exactly what implications that has, but it just means that you can't expect Unity to smooth like two mountains into a flat surface, which I wish is how it worked. All right, cool. So now we have something a little bit smoother to work with. If I remember, we were using like 16 and 20. To be honest, sometimes it's really useful to actually write down your settings for certain like combinations that you find work really well, because it can sort of be a bit of a trial and error, you know, just dealing with how the settings are going to work. All right, so now I'm going to, so I need the opacity to be a little bit higher. Let's do 16 and 18. Okay. Another thing I don't really like about this volcano, as I have it now, is the center lake is like too circular. We need to make that less obvious that it's a circle. Why? Well, I think bean shapes can be considered more organic than perfect circles, or even regular non-perfect circles. So that's going to make our volcano a bit longer, but that's all right. And what I'm also going to do is have the assumption that whenever this volcano erupted or whatever, it actually ripped out a chunk of the walls right here. So the part of the surrounding walls that did not survive would have been right here, because that's where the waterfall is going to go. Okay. Still need a higher opacity. Do something like this. Kinda. And again, don't worry about like, you know, it's more important to get something down, even if it's like, you know, you're like, I don't really know how this is turning out, but you can never let, you know, your like fears or concerns about how it's turning out actually prevent you from just getting something on paper or on Unity, because you can always revise. But, you know, if there's nothing to even start with, then it makes it a lot more difficult. All right, another thing we're going to do is we're going to create a very simple plane to simulate our water level. Eventually we'll probably, you know, actually make a 3D mesh, but this is going to be important to just give us an idea of where our water is going to be. All right, let's sort of make, and I already like, see this, there's sort of this natural S shape that just randomly formed. And I like that, so we're going to emphasize that. Yeah, we're gonna emphasize that. Maybe this is like another smaller stream that would feed into our larger one. Now, you know, it's tough to just do streams like willy-nilly because of how we do water, but, you know, if we ever were to able to do streams, you know, maybe I'd put another one here. Let's make a sort of really nice little peak there. This can be a valley that, This side's kind of getting really steep, but I don't really mind that. As long as we're still generally preserving that aesthetic of, you know, how those volcanoes kind of had those valleys and hills like that, I think we'll be all right. Oof, that one was a little bad. All right, let's go back here. Maybe this is way too straight. We gotta curve it around a bit. See, I'm feeling like my opacity is just a little too high. I'm kind of making divots that are going a bit too deep. Normally I'd be rotating and like panning a lot more too, but because it's kind of laggy, it's like hard to do that. So, I'm not really moving as much as I should to really fully understand the perspective. All right, now I can already see a problem here. Look at how high this mountain is compared to everything around it. It's really low to the ground. You know, if the player's going to be standing like right here, let's find a test pony. Where are you, pony? There you are. You know, that's not a very impressive volcano because we're standing almost at the height of the top of it. So we need to do something about that. And what that is going to involve, I believe, is going to be some very large scale terrain shifts. So we're going to bust down the opacity very significantly. We only want it to be like 8 or something. And change the brush size to be really huge. And we're just ever going to so slightly decrease the height of this whole area. Now this area really, you know, there's already been thought put into the height of this whole area, so we can't really decrease it that much, but I can do a little bit, and then rotate. God. And then we're going to increase. Geez, I need an even bigger brush. We're going to increase the whole volcano. This is kind of a risky procedure. And you'll see that I can go up to like 400, 500 brush size. You won't be able to do that. That's a custom mod that Justin made. So you won't be able to do that really necessarily. But this is too big. It's too big. Generally what I'm doing right now is like not even a good idea. You should kind of have locked in the heights to not have to make global changes like this. But nobody's perfect, so by doing this, I believe I will be able to fix our issue of this volcano looking too wimpy. Alright, so already it looks better. It actually looks like, you know, coming across this bridge, it's going to be pretty significantly taller than the areas that you actually walk on. Drop this down a bit more. Yeah, that's already a lot better. Okay. Now this volcano is still looking pretty rough around the edges here, so mainly this is due to the top lip not being very well defined. I lost my plane. You're also welcome to like ask questions or stuff too. Probably should have said that like an hour ago, but okay. Yeah, we're just gonna have to re-put in our stream. It looks like we're actually gonna have to more drastically change the layout of the stream, which is no problem. So that this, you can make things steep, but there's a limitation. Because the steeper you make something with a Unity terrain, the more stretched the texture is going to get. Because you can imagine that the textures are basically just a top-down projection. So anything that is really changing in the z-axis or the height axis is going, I guess it's y in Unity. Anything that's changing in the y-axis is going to have cause some stretching of the texture. All right, so I'm not entirely happy with this volcano, but I think we were able to make it a bit more interesting than it was at the start, that's for sure. Maybe this part's just a little bit too varied. Come on, there we go. Get that auto-save in. You know what? Why don't we actually make the lake a variable height? That's fine. I can't decide how I want this lake to look. It's very tricky. I definitely like the idea of having some kind of little island in the middle, or peninsula. I don't want to go full island. All right, so let's see how that looks. Now we're going to go back to our terrain settings. We're going to change the material back to the one that we use, which is Toon Terrain. All right, now you can see how things instantly really flatten out. It's really important to flip back and forth between the Toon Terrain and the regular, because as you can see, once you get to the Toon Terrain, it's all about the profile. All of the detail that we painted in really gets simplified down to, just a couple profile edges, which there's nothing wrong with that. But as you can see right now, what I'm essentially doing is just going in with the smooth brush. I'm cleaning up that profile a bit on some of these more jagged areas that we can see sort of. You never want it to be jagged, so jagged that you can see like points. Like this actually isn't too bad. It is a little bit hilly and bumpy, but it's not pointy. So the general idea is, because we created this hill valley sort of template, as I rotate around this volcano, you can still see this layering effect of these silhouettes based on where I am, which is perfect because that's going to give off, our idea, like our notion that this is a volcano, at least in the sense of, how they look in real life. And it still works even on our really flat shader. Maybe I'll cut this down a bit. All right, it's good to know that works. And we're almost out of time today. I think we were able to cover a decent amount. We have our volcano. I was able to show you some pretty cool techniques. We weren't able to incorporate landscape add-on pieces, but I can probably work with that in another video. The last thing maybe we want to do is maybe paint this terrain a bit. Right now it's all just kind of green. And we don't want that for sure. We want, let's see, let's add texture. Let's see, cliff maybe. Rock. It's good to know what things are called. What kind of rocks do we want to use? I wish we had more of this gray mountain cliff. This would be cool. But we don't have the exact ones. So I guess for now I'm just going to default to how we do them before, which is how we do them here. So we just use the cliffs. Although it would be nice. Sorry, I'm a bit indecisive as to the textures. Because all we really have are these green cliffs. Let's see. Just take a look at our textures, see what maybe there's something I'm missing. No. Yeah, we don't really have gray, which would have been nice. But I'm just going to do... Should I just do the purple? I'm just going to do it how we do all of the other cliffs. And you know what? Why don't we just see if we can maybe incorporate some of these in here while we're at it. Let's scale them down a bit. Then again, I don't really think that's gonna work as well because of the style of this mountain. So let's just see how it works with this. Text. All right, let's do this one. See, oh, too big. So is there any questions you had? Pretty much just about out of time, but you know, was this generally helpful? Did I waste too much time on one thing, maybe not spend enough time on another? You know, I'm really doing this to help out everybody who's watching, who's maybe interested in, you know, learning a little bit more about Unity, and especially within the framework of, you know, our project. So, you know, Hydra, I feel like maybe you probably already knew just about all of this. What am I doing wrong here? Oh, silly. Alright, let's do this and this. Okay. So, brush size is still too big. We're really pushing it down to our smallest brush size we can. Actually, how would I want to do this? Would I want to paint all the mountains and then reveal the parts that are going to be grassy? Or would I want to paint all the parts that are grassy and then reveal? How would it actually work? You would probably have the underlying rock, and then the grass would creep over top of it. So that's how we're going to do it. We're going to have the underlying grass, or the underlying rock. Let's do it's like 20. Underlying rock here. Could probably do this faster. Yeah, I could probably do this a lot faster if I just got a bigger brush size. Alright. Yeah, just all this is gonna be purple. This maybe goes out really far here. It's out really far here and here. Alright, great. Now we would take the grass. Which one do I want to use? Let's use just this common one. 50, 50. Actually, this is the northern area. This is actually going to be using the darker grass. So let's go with that. Cut the brush size down to like 6. And is this the really detailed one? See, this is what I was saying about the labeling thing. It would really help. Like, I can barely tell what I even have selected. Oh my god. 50, 50. Which one was bigger and which one was smaller? 50, 50 or 100, 100? Ah, you know what? It's not too important. We're gonna have to go even smaller brush size. Now we're getting into some fun details. Oh, too small. You know, so obviously, you know, this I think I could probably, clean this up a bit better. If I were to actually make this, a little bit nicer, what I would do is I would better define these sort of like cliff edges so that the areas where the grass transition to the mountains, it would generally follow, once again, erosion. Because generally speaking, grasses and mosses want to lay on a flat surface where there's no or very little erosion. Anything that has a very steep, mountainy surface, there's less for the grass and the plants to hold on to. So it's not going to be as apparent that they're there. Or, I'm sorry, there's just not going to be as much of it there. So what I'm essentially doing is going over and saying, all right, all of the flat areas that are in the valleys, because valleys are generally near water, the flatter valley areas are going to be grassy, and the steeper mountainous areas are going to be rocky. And then we also have our little stream, our S stream. Could probably define it out a bit more, but it's gonna go down. All right. Sorry this is going a bit over, but I think we're almost done. Illustrating a couple key points here. And I'm actually happy that it's starting to look like something too. Just get some grass in here. And a little bit up here. Oops. A little bit in here. Oh. Oh, come on. Usually I'm a lot more fast at this, I swear. You should see, there's this really cool Unity script I saw that somebody made that paints, it essentially does this automatically based on the angle of the terrain. So flatter areas and steeper areas, it applies a different texture. So it's sort of like, it's just really cool. All right, this needs to kind of go in a bit here. You always want to try and avoid like straight lines. If it can be an S shape, it probably should be. Or some kind of bean shape. Maybe it kind of comes down a bit here. And I kind of like this whole top part to be grassy. Doesn't have to be pure mountains up at the top. Maybe a little flatten that out later, make that grassy. All right, let's take a look at how it looks in the game. And I think we'll end there. There we go. Come on. Come on. Oh, Hydra, yeah, that. We'll change. Oh, I forgot to change the shader. We'll change the brush size once Justin finishes updating to Unity 5. Then I'll ask him if he can change that script so that it, sorry, I forgot to change the shader back. And let's unhide this. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Unhide this. Unhide the outer terrain. We can delete these, didn't end up using them. And unhide trees. Oh, that's a... Look at it, it's still working. There's a lot of polygons in that layer. Ooh. Wow. Yeah, this scene, we really pushed the upper limits in this scene. Wow. I can't do anything. Unity is loading right now. I hid all the trees and it sure took a lot shorter amount of time to hide them than it did to re-reveal them. Man, really? There we go. My gosh. Guess there's a lot of trees though. Okay, just want to take a look in there. Come on. Maybe it's about time I got a new computer. Ooh, this one's going on 5 years old. Okay. Great, let's see how it came out. So players, there's going to be this path that essentially starts over here. All right, and you know, I can instantly already see parts that I'd want to change. You can see from a distance, first of all, the mip mapping is causing it to get very pointy at the top here. We don't really want that, so I'd fix that. And I would probably want the grass to creep up more gently over here as it does on this side. So those would be two fixes I can see immediately. Getting closer, I'm really happy with how the shadowing is laying on our mountain. By doing this hill valley alternation, it's really making the more dynamic parts of the day, like the early afternoon, or the late afternoon, the early morning, look nicer, just because you get that dynamic shadow. As far as the height's concerned, the lake size, yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with this lake size. I don't really want it to be like a huge lake. It's just kind of going to be more, well, this is more of a pond, I guess. Maybe this could be a little bigger, but I'm not too worried about that now. Let's see how it looks from over here. I'm not too happy with this actually. Yeah, this side I would need some more cleanup. It just needs to be more, more grass right along this ridge line would really benefit a lot, and a little bit more just general detail work. But overall, the shape is a lot better than how we started, and you can see how we used a lot of techniques, considering erosion, using real world references, um, just how we painted those hills and valleys, things like that, to sort of make this a real looking set piece. All right, I think that's everything I'm going to cover. Um, Next time we may go over, I think I'm going to go over more using assets in a scene next time, because all we did was strictly work with Unity terrains. We did not go over, how to use and incorporate all these assets we already have into a terrain to make it look nicer. So I think we're going to do that. Yeah, that backside really turned out a lot nicer. And I think that's because we were able to make it more sloped and variable, because the front side it's really constrained because it needs to be really steep in order to have that waterfall. Oh, there's an invisible wall here. So the backs, if we can somehow make it look nicer like in the back, like in the front, I think that'll work. So maybe increasing this edge line and only making the steep part be right where we want the waterfall is really gonna make it look nice. All right, well, thanks for watching, and I look forward to talking with everyone next week. All right. Have a delicious, delicious day.